Evening, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of RFL. I'm Richard French, and tonight we focus exclusively on the Boston terror investigation. First, we're going to have the latest coming out of Boston in the investigation, and then we will hear from a former FBI agent on whether or not the intelligence community dropped the ball on this one. Then we focus on some of the tricky legal issues that have cropped up. Should the alleged terror suspect be treated as an enemy combatant or as an American citizen? Then we will talk about how this plays into the political week ahead. Does the conversation potentially about guns, or for that matter immigration, change possibly in light of not just the bombings or what might come out of the investigations? And later we talk about the role of the media. When old and new media collide, what is the conclusion? It is all coming up in this edition of RFL, but let's begin with the latest on the investigation. And for that, let's bring in Andrew Whitman, senior political correspondent. What do we learn today, Andrew?
Well, Rich, in Boston this afternoon, a quiet descended on the usually bustling city exactly 1 week after those deadly bombs exploded near the marathon's finish line, a tribute to those who lost their lives. The first of their funerals underway today, and in stark contrast to this solemn moment from his hospital room, the young man suspected in that attack, now formally charged in that crime. The surviving suspect in the Boston Marathon bombings now potentially facing the death penalty. The charges, including using a weapon of mass destruction, read to him today at his hospital bedside. Just more than an hour later, at 2:50 p.m., a moment of silence, marking the time the bombs went off near the finish line of the Boston Marathon exactly 1 week earlier. Among those who lost their lives, 29-year-old Crystal Campbell, the first of the victims to be laid to rest. Today, investigators are still scouring the scene where Crystal, along with 2 others, were killed and more than 170 were injured. The search for an explanation continues as the FBI questions 19-year-old Tamerlan Tsarnaev, hospitalized, wounded in the neck, but writing some answers.
Was his brother the primary motivating force for him to become radicalized? Why did they end up doing what they did on that particular day?
Much of the investigation is still focused on his 26-year-old brother Tamerlan, examining his life, his recent trip back to Russia, as some question whether the FBI did enough to monitor Tamerlan after they questioned him 2 years ago.
They investigated it thoroughly and did not find terrorist activity, domestic or foreign.
Now, in the aftermath of Tamerlan Tsarnaev's death, a timeline has emerged that may offer clues to his alleged radicalization. Tamerlan was born in 1986 to an ethnically Chechen family in Kyrgyzstan. In 2001, the family moved from Kyrgyzstan to Dagestan. In 2002, his parents immigrated to the U.S. with Johar. Tamerlan and his 2 sisters stayed in Kazakhstan with an uncle. In 2003, Tamerlan first entered the U.S. From 2006 to 2008, he attended Bunker Hill Community College as a part-time student. In 2008, he got, quote, involved in religion, this according to his mother. The following year, 2009, he had a falling out with his uncle after calling him an infidel and telling him that God had a plan for him. In July of 2009, Tamerlan arrested for domestic abuse and battery after allegedly assaulting his girlfriend. In 2011, he begins to pray 5 times a day. In early 2011, Russia asks the FBI to look at Tamerlan's activities because he was preparing to leave the U.S. to, quote, travel to the country's region to join unspecified underground groups, according to the FBI. He was characterized as a follower of radical Islam who had changed drastically since 2010. After interviewing him and family members, the FBI says it, quote, did not find any terrorism activity. On January 12, 2012, he goes to Russia. What he did there, not clear, but his father said they were together at all times. On July 17, 2012, he returns to the U.S. After returning from that trip, he creates a YouTube channel with links to a number of videos of militant Islamic groups. He appears to have posted and then removed a video of a militant named Uba Dujana, a jihadist leader who was killed by Russian troops. September of 2012, he presents an application for U.S. citizenship. The application prompted additional investigation of him in 2013 by federal law enforcement agencies. April 15, 2013, the Boston bombings. April 18, 2013, police respond to a call on the MIT campus where a university officer has been shot. Police later say they believe the bombing suspects are responsible for the shooting. The following day, April 19, 2013, Friday, Tamerlan Tsarnaev dies after a shootout with police in Watertown, Massachusetts. As we piece together the picture of a life Clues to what allegedly turned the young man into a radical will continue to emerge, as will the questions. Rich?
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. And joining us now via Skype from Qatar is Martin Reardon. He's Vice President of the Soufan Group and a 21-year veteran of the FBI. And before joining the Soufan Group, Mr. Reardon served as chief of the FBI's 24/7 Terrorist Screening Operations Center. I can't think of a better guest to get tonight here. Martin, thank you very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Questions have already emerged, Martin, that say, listen, the FBI already flagged this guy as early as 2011, and when he went over to Russia in 2012, that he should have been flagged. And it's already been argued by the head of the Homeland Security Department in the House that he was being further radicalized, they think, overseas. Certainly should have been interviewed when he came back. Isn't that part of SOP? If the guy's already on your radar and he goes back to a place where you're concerned the situation could go from bad to worse, when he comes back in the country, due diligence would suggest you ask him a few questions.
I think you have to look at what the actual procedures are here, how the FBI handles these. And they actually work according to the Attorney General guidelines, directs them how to conduct national security investigations. There are one or two likely scenarios that would have happened in this case. Based on the foreign government information that Tamerlan Tsarnaev was being radicalized, the FBI did one of two things. They would have opened up a threat assessment, which is nothing more than when you receive information that an individual, an organization, a group may pose a national security risk for the United States. Threat assessments, there are limited things that the FBI can do. They can do internet checks, check the person online. They can do database checks either through the FBI or other federal, state, local agencies. They can do a non-pretext interview. They cannot do any of the more sophisticated or traditional investigative techniques that are used in other cases. That's the threat assessment. Another option would have been to open up a preliminary investigation. In this case, again, the predicate being the receipt of foreign government information that this individual could have been or may have been a member of a terrorist organization. If it was a preliminary investigation, a few things to keep in mind. Most of the standard investigative techniques can be used, but those that require court orders and some other sensitive techniques cannot be used. So there are restrictions there. If at the time, in 2011, they did not identify those specific and articulable facts, they would have had no choice but to close the matter.
If there's one thing from the outside that you saw throughout this investigation, and I know it's easy to Monday morning quarterback, but I'm going to ask you to do it since everybody in Washington seems to already have. What do you think, if one thing could have been done different in the investigation, what would it have been?
Well, I'll say, if you're going to use the analogy of Monday morning quarterback, I'm going to say that, my team won. I think this was a textbook investigation from Monday through Friday when when the second subject was arrested. Tragic, it was. But this was a good example of the state of Massachusetts, the law enforcement agencies in Boston and the surrounding communities, and the federal government working closely together to resolve this question or to resolve the investigation. So I would say it was textbook. There was some breaking ground in this where the public was relied on so heavily to provide whatever video and still photos they had of the marathon, the venue. Breaking ground when the governor and the mayor asked the population of Boston to remain in their homes that day because they had basically channelized, they had a good idea of where the younger Tsarnaev brother was, keep everybody indoors. I thought this was a textbook investigation. In any investigation, there are always lessons to be learned afterwards, but I didn't see any mistakes that were made. I thought it was a calculated and a very good decision to release that photo Thursday afternoon.
And finally, Martin, we know that Mr. Tsarnaev had more than a few stops, more than just to see his family in his most recent visit, and they're already investigating, in effect, his itinerary. Real concern here I've heard from some folks in the intelligence community is, God forbid there were organizations behind this. Then it opens up a whole host of geopolitical concerns. Is that the worry, that these weren't just two disaffected brothers who carried off a tragic atrocity? I guess the big worry is that this thing could grow bigger than just the two of them.
Well, it can, and of course, this is what this is the next step that they want to determine, and this is why the president decided to use the Hague for the investigation and to utilize the public safety exception to Miranda. Determine if there were any other accomplices, either in the Boston area, in the greater New England or Mid-Atlantic region, or overseas. Were there other accomplices who are prepared or were prepared to conduct terrorist attacks in the United States or anywhere abroad? So, there is that chance. The question remains, were they lone wolves, just the two of them, or were they part of a terrorist organization or another cell that might be operating here in the United States? Did they get outside assistance in terms of planning, financing, or training? So these are all things that the investigation is going to need to determine. These are the questions that have to be answered. How were they radicalized? When were they radicalized? Was it self-radicalization? Were they influenced by others? Was it through the internet? What caused these brothers to commit this act?
Martin Reardon, great job. I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.